Welcome back, everyone, and welcome. We have with us Rhonda Magee. Welcome, Rhonda.
Thank you. It's good to be with you.
Great. And Rhonda is a mindfulness teacher and a emeritus law professor. So, Rhonda, how did you come to be both those things, and how did they go together?
Well, thank you so much for inviting me into this conversation with you and for this good question. So, I guess became a law professor um, as a way of trying to pursue some longstanding, I guess you might call it a calling, um, to try to make the best of the opportunities that I had. I was born in the late 1960s, in the last century, and at a time where there was a lot of change happening. I should say a lot of social activism had resulted in a lot of change. It wasn't just happening, right? But at the point at which uh, some of the ways that the civil rights movement invited opportunities for people like me to get an education and pursue um, career choices that had not previously been particularly open to women or certainly to women of color. I grew up at a time when um, I had these options because I was doing well in school, and for these reasons, for me, um, I had always felt a sense of some kind of social responsibility. Really wanting to give back. Um, and I was very curious about a lot of things. So before becoming a lawyer, I studied sociology at the undergraduate level, and then at the graduate level, I thought I might get a PhD. So I was inclined toward being a professor when I went to law school. And and then at a certain point, after I got my law degree and had practiced for a few years before becoming a professor at the University of San Francisco, where I spent my career, there was a moment there where I realized that despite all the trainings that I had gotten, um, including some people are also aware that I was, I on my resume also was the fact that I became an Army officer because I had taken an Army ROTC scholarship to school. So I'd had all these really great trainings. I went to the University of Virginia, but none of them really seemed to prepare me for the inner dimensions of what I was facing, going into these places and spaces where, on the one hand, there was great opportunity, but on the other hand, there were challenges because, again, women of color were not, common in many of these places where I was. So I really found myself thinking over all of those role models and folks that I'd seen in my past who in some way had embodied a commitment to an inner work aspect, as some way of supporting themselves for what they're doing in the world. And I had to go all the way back to my own grandmother, who was not educated in all the fancy ways that I had been, and but had found her way into the ministry later in life and had a deep um, commitment to what really I think of it now as like a centering prayer practice. She would get up every morning before dawn and center herself, read scriptures that would inspire her, and really like kind of fill her own cup before going out and doing the unglamorous work that she did at that time, which was cleaning houses for other people. And so, as a young lawyer, when I thought about like who had I seen in my life who had some kind of inner work practice, it was my grandmother. And although at the time I was exploring different modalities, she had a Christian-based prayer practice. For me, mindfulness and meditation seemed to be more suited to the kind of training that I was looking for, which is about like centering and calming my mind, becoming more intimate with my own habits and patterns of thought, and really, accessing a way to blend that practice with a kind of a skillful way of deploying the knowledge, skills, and values that I had gotten in the other trainings in the world. So that's really, I mean, I sort of started trying to teach myself meditation when I felt I needed it as a young law professor. And
Mhm.
then fortunately, I found some other lawyers and law professors who were interested in really changing and transforming law from within. Some of them were interested in meditation. Some of them were interested in a kind of spiritual activism. But we found this sort of niche of people. I found a niche of people, a little network. And this was back in the early 2000s. And I now can really clearly see that had I not found that little group here in the Bay Area, I probably wouldn't have this interesting resume today.
Oh, wow. So there's so much that's cool in this story. I mean, first finding that we're close to the same age, although you're retired and I'm not. Um, and then
I'm sort of retired.
sort of retired and
Right.
being
Yeah.
an
Yeah.
emeritus. I mean, honestly,
Yeah.
my
Yeah.
mom was an emeritus,
Yeah.
not
Yeah.
much, was an
Yeah.
emeritus in her 50s, actually.
Hmm.
Um, and so, I mean, there's so much about about the people around you and how they were influences, but also how you pulled something from them, right? Like your grandmother was Christian in a, culture and subculture that was very heavily Christian influenced. And
Hmm.
she found mindfulness inside of that Christianity, right? And
Well,
maybe it was already, maybe lots of
yeah.
people were doing that and I just hadn't heard about it, or maybe she found it.
Well, actually, just to be clear, for her, it wasn't mindfulness. For
Found
her,
it.
it was centering prayer,
Centering
right?
prayer.
So
Yeah.
yeah, it was really it was a Christian kind of sort of centering practice that reminds me of mindfulness because of that kind of discipline of before dawn, really dedicating oneself on a kind of a regular basis. But it wasn't really mindfulness meditation. Now I've studied enough kind of Christian mystics, in particular Howard Thurman, who was a teacher of Martin Luther King Jr. and others. I know that there is a bridge between the kind of centering prayer that my grandmother found and mindfulness meditation that other teachers that I've since studied have helped me to see. But yeah, for with my grandmother, it was really just that she was embodying this idea of like you get up in the morning, you start your day with a certain kind of intentionality. And then I found mindfulness on my own through these crazy lawyers.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Very, very, very cool. And I also had a grandmother who who cleaned houses, although she also was a physical therapist, but not what that means today. It meant that she gave people massages and worked in an
Hmm.
orthopedist's office.
Wow.
Yeah.
So she was making a way, as my grandmother might say, making a way out of no way.
Yes, making a way out of no way. And there's
Hmm.
lots of very interesting stories about my grandmother that we won't share because no one's interested in me. But
No, but I'm curious, right? Our grandmother stories are now in the room. Let's just say that for all who are listening.
yeah. Oh my God, now I have to show people her art.
There you go.
There it is.
Oh,
She liked,
wow.
yeah,
Wow.
she liked to
Beautiful.
do she wasn't Christian, but she loved Christian art and she would reframe
Wow.
and
Beautiful.
tarnish and fold
Beautiful.
these things. Yeah.
Beautiful.
Thank you. Thank you.
Mm.
And the other thing that I'm really hearing is you started on this path to mindfulness for yourself originally.
Yes, for sure.
And how did it become, how did you start to see that it's something that was kind of more needed, and not just on an individual level, but on
Yeah.
a social change level?
Yeah. Well, thank you for that question. To be honest, I mean, I'll just say that for me, um, the more I practiced meditation, read about it, studied, hung out with people who, were committed to really cultivating and applying these centuries old, millennia old, right, practices to daily life here in our time. It just to me seemed just the most natural thing. I mean, I say that even though I'm aware that many people have told me again and again, like, um, and I can see certainly not just because people have told me, but I can see how um, mindfulness meditation is often presented as a very personal inner practice for personal focus and personal well-being and all of those things. I feel that that's the way it's often presented in the West right now, certainly in the United States. With these apps, everybody can just sit and meditate and then go on and right conquer the world. When to me, when you really read the underlying teachings, the teachings of the Buddha and others from whom we are indebted, right? Whose teachings helped give rise to the mindfulness revolution that I certainly have been a beneficiary of. They seem pretty clear about the application of those practices. Well, the foundation of them in a kind of a invitation to living ethically, right? So just living as best you can, not perfectly, but doing the best we can to minimize suffering ultimately, starting with ourselves, but not only for ourselves. To me, this is, all through the teachings and the effort to, sort of cultivate from practicing meditation a way of being in relationship to all the different challenges that come up in any everyday life. They're really all about awareness for oneself in the world. So, awareness for how it is that we meet, how we engage with each other, how the actions that we take, and the recognition that those actions have consequences and they impact people. Um, and so if you, to me, it's almost surprising that more people don't see that connection because and I more and more you hear people say, well, we need a more radical mindfulness. And I'm like, if you really are doing mindfulness, it's pretty radical because it's a radical invitation to wake up to the fact that your life already completely matters. We're embedded in a world where our actions always do matter. And it's about kind of waking up to the possibility and even the joy that comes from really like arriving at home in the world and in the work that we do with this kind of commitment to minimizing suffering for ourselves and for other people. And so for me, it was just a very natural thing to see that, as I was cultivating more emotional awareness, right, able to see when I was getting, you know, emotionally hijacked or triggered and trying to figure out ways to minimize the sort of inadvertent consequences of that, or the ways that I was, trying to notice some of the ways you can get caught in communicating with others. You hear something, you misperceive them, you think you heard something, all of a sudden you're maybe ruminating and telling the story, right? In other words, there's so many little habits about just being human that I started to become more aware of in myself and committed to, you know, doing my best to minimize their negative consequences. To me, that just seemed like a perfect, it seemed like it might perfectly apply to so many of the social challenges that we have, the difficulties we have listening to each other well, the assumptions we make when we sort of hear something that reminds us of something else. We're often running on a story. um, all of these different ways, or when we are been when we how it is that often when we hit perceive that we've been wounded, we've been harmed in some way, someone has done us wrong in some way, it can be difficult to move on, right? The difficulty we have letting go of some, maybe righteous sense that we do have some. So to both take action, align with values, to try to make the world better, but to try and embed in the action and in our responses to what's going on, something of the aspiration for a better world, like something
Mm.
that's not just about vengeance, but something that is about trying to repair and transform. Um, and for me, fundamentally, to bring a kind of a loving, compassionate dimension to it. Um, that all seemed to naturally flow out of the particular practices that I was fortunate to be introduced to.
Mm. And so this leads to a question that you had offered to talk about, which is, um, well, let me do the lead in. So some really intense things are happening, right?
Very
Um,
intense things happen.
some really intense things are happening in the world.
Yeah.
Some things that, from some moral standpoints would be considered evil. Um, and it's human beings doing them. So, right, so, um, you know, my big concerns are about fascism and genocide. And how do you see fascism and how do you see mindfulness making a difference for us coping and preventing, minimizing the harm from rising fascism?
Well, it's again such an important question, always, and certainly right now, because I do agree with you. We're recording this, we're having this conversation at a time when there are many signs that fascism is on the rise, um, around the world, actually. So, in a way, I see it as such a profound uh, counter to so much of what I've been trained to uphold. The rule of law, the idea that no one is above the law, um, the commitments to human rights, and to the broader and broader expansion of the principles of democracy, and human rights to all of us. So I could go on and on, in the direction of what I think fascism stands against. I think it stands against so much that I hold dear about liberalism, liberal democracy, and the rule of law. Um, and this sort of uh, rule of the one, or the oligarch, the sort of rule of the powerful, as against these systems that seek to hold folks accountable, um, the exploitation of the vulnerable, the kind of, you know, sort of justice for my people and only my people, whoever arbitrarily my people happen to be, because that's what
Mhm.
fascism does. It sort of, it makes up the
In-group,
rules as it
out-group.
goes along. Yeah,
Yeah.
that in group and out group, and and giving itself, accruing to itself, to the powerful, the always malleable right and possibility to redefine who the in group and out group is, and to apply, right, the rules and ways that keep favoring that sort of moving target, at will. All of that to me is just painfully at odds with what I, was trained to uphold as a lawyer, as a law professor, as a U.S. military officer. Frankly, even though I know we have all kinds of issues with the military, but the idea that we would, find ourselves, endorsing what looked to be, yeah, these practices of authoritarianism, of fascism, of might makes right, and arbitrary kind of, we make the rules. It's really difficult to watch, and difficult to bear witness to. I will say the one thing though that makes me not shocked that we're seeing this is that I do see similarities between racism and fascism. In a way, I don't remember the name of the person from whom I got this way of thinking about it, but there's some scholar that I read who basically defined, let's see, it's been a while since I put it out there, but basically, fascism as, all the sort of normal sciences that uphold racism, that are now just being applied to whoever the leader would like to apply them to. So all of the in group, out group, the disrespect, disregard that can happen anywhere at any time, the ways of systematically disfavoring certain people, that through in racism can get channeled to racially othered people, in fascism, it's just whoever is the outgroup, whoever the leaders would like to disrespect in those ways. Yeah. And so because we have seen so much of that kind of structured inequality and oppression in our history in the United States, and pockets, well, in ways that feels like certainly fascism to the disfavored, racialized, minoritized group, and certainly felt like fascism during times of segregation and obviously during enslavement, right? These times when people were being exploited in the time of post-slavery, but segregation, paying taxes, paying for all the things, but not getting the same benefits from them. So there are many ways that our history might prepare us to kind of not be shocked to see this. And again, if you look at little towns in the South, I was just reading an article discussing how the KKK had taken over the state of Oregon, in the early part of the 20th century. We have pockets within our history that tell us exactly, not to be surprised that this could happen here.
Could happen here.
Yeah, but it is.
Yeah.
And so for me, mindfulness then, just as somehow mindfulness seemed readily able to help me, kind of cultivate a sense of what's possible, notwithstanding living in a time and a place where racism and sexism and all those kind of intersectional isms might sometimes be arrayed against me, or I might feel targeted or victimized. As I saw mindfulness, just as I have seen that mindfulness can help me with that feeling vulnerable, figuring out how to, again, make a way out of no way or access my highest and best, notwithstanding all of those things. I think that preparation to apply or to be supported in navigating a world where there's racism and sexism and classism and all those things through my mindfulness practice, like that practice, it seems like it just applies, sadly, but equally to ways that we can center ourselves, strengthen ourselves for the struggle against the resistance of, fascism in our time and genocide in our time. So it's really, to me, about helping us become clear about our values, helping us to do the best we can without, mindfulness to me has it embeds a lot of kind of a quality of compassion, recognizing that our actions make a difference and we're embedded in a world. So it's both, you have agency and we're always kind of buffeted about by circumstances that we do not fully control. And that is an invitation, right? In other words, we're sort of we enter the sense that we have of ourselves as totally separate, independent actors is probably not quite so. And so embedded in that is a kind of compassion, like do the best you can, but also take a deep breath, let go at the end of the day, place your head on a pillow knowing you did the best you could for that day and begin again the next day. Do the best you can, seeing things more clearly, and taking action from that place, but also not getting stuck. Like I already have it, I already see things, knowing that, we're all works in progress. We all can see what we can see, but there's always so much more to be seen. So, mindfulness is often a teaching about not getting stuck, about noticing what stuckness can feel like and knowing the harm that it can do, and inviting much more of a kind of what's called the middle way, right? The way of like discerning the best action to take provisionally, and then having the sort of ethical accountability commitment to sort of notice what have been the consequences of this action and what might I do next, right? And being willing to kind of have a little bit of that, again, as against being stuck and like, I'm doing it this way, this is the way, this is the only way, opening to, all right, well, what do the circumstances, right, reveal to me if I can pause and rather than automatically reacting from my script, from my sense that I wrote, the thing I wrote 10 years ago about what I should do today, instead of that, opening up, pausing and seeing that we have options, choosing to respond rather than to react, I think those are some of the ways that I at least am hoping to take it one day at a time, one step at a time, and see if I can, move in some sort of way in relationship to these times that might, at least not cause as much harm as I might otherwise cause if I
Mhm.
didn't have this practice as a support.
Mm.
So
Um,
there's a humble, you hear the humility, there's a
yeah,
humility,
humility.
right? It's
Yeah.
like we realize that we could not always be right. And that when it comes to like the fight against these big evils, it's quite easy for us to feel almost righteously clear that yes, we absolutely know always what's right and not, and who's wrong, and what the people and perpetrators, should get in response. And I get that. I'm a law professor. I've been in the military. Like I get that energy. Um, and I do think that at least for me, you know, mindfulness is a support for really trying to slow us down sometimes when we are really about to take an action. Again, we still may decide after pausing and reflecting and seeing what our options are and choosing, this is what we're going to do. But the idea, I think, and the idea is to give ourselves some space to think. I'm thinking right now, actually, as I say this, and I want to wrap this part of the response up here. I'm thinking about a documentary I saw, a short documentary of Oppenheimer, right? Known as the father of the atomic bomb. Toward the end of his life, he was recorded reflecting on what his professional career had wrought. And I was struck by the extent to which what he was hoping for was a world in which somehow all of the beautiful information, technology, and capacity that humankind had been cultivating that really was bringing us to new levels of possibility for harm, but maybe also for good. His ultimate hope was that we could somehow cultivate the ability to pause and to, kind of be more engaged in a kind of space of reflection as we take action and after we take action. So I was, so ultimately, I think there's something more for all of us to learn as we go about how effectively to use reflective pauses as a support for taking more wise action in the world.
Yeah. Thank you. So we had been going to let you do a practice and we are almost out of time. So you get to tell people about the practice you're offering in your gift.
Yeah. Well, so a very short practice that I like to offer quite frequently. Well, first of all, I use acronyms a lot. So there's a practice called S.T.O.P, which is, S.T.O.P. The S is literally pause, stop. The T, take a conscious breath. You do that right now very easily. Ha. And then just observe with the O of the S.T.O.P. Thoughts, emotions, physical sensations. Remember you're supported by the ground or by the breath, by your colleagues, or the residue of love and support that you've experienced in your life. And so that O is very powerful as a way of helping us discern wise action as best we can. And the P then, S.T.O.P, proceed from that presence to take some kind of action that we hope will be for positive good, but being committed to changing course if we need to, because that flexibility, I think, is going to be important for us as we get through this time.
Oh, that's amazing. And tell everybody about the free gift. Yeah, or did you?
Yeah, I think the free gift is going to be an opportunity to receive that a guided meditation, including a stop practice.
Perfect. Okay. My ex-girlfriend has some wonderful acronyms too, and one of them, there's one SMASH, which starts with stop,
Good.
Yeah,
We
and
love
it's
acronyms.
actually
Teachers often love acronyms.
for use in escalated situations,
Mm.
right? Because at first I was like, can we stop if things get too intense? And sometimes often we can, and often we need to. Just
Yeah.
very quick.
And even if it's just momentarily, right? Right before we send that email, or right before we just immediately react, right, to a provocation. Just a breath. A breath can do wonders.
Oh. Well, Rhonda, this was a wonderful conversation. I'm um, so glad to have had this time with you, to share you with the audience, and um, to just really get the opportunity of being mindfully mindful in community, and making a difference in the world, no matter where it's at.
Thank you. Thank you very, very much. And um, listeners, feel free to connect with me further at rhondavmagee.com.
Wonderful. All right, I'm going to stop recording.